Hello listeners, and welcome to Plugged In, the energy news podcast from Montel. Each week, we bring you in-depth analysis and insights from across the energy sector. This week, we focus on Europe's energy security and the crucial role of flexibility ensuring a resilient power system. With cyber threats on the rise and geopolitical uncertainty looming large, how prepared is Europe to keep the lights on? The European Commission has recently announced its Clean Industrial Deal and Affordable Energy Action Plan. Will these measures be enough to shield the continent from external pressures and internal political shifts and the rise of populism? And as electric vehicles become more widespread, could they be key to unlocking greater grid flexibility, lowering costs for consumers, and enhancing Europe's energy independence? Setting the scene for us this week is Fatima Sadouki, who's Montel's Brussels correspondent. A warm welcome to you, Fatima.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for having me.
Fatima, you're following this closely. You're following what's happening in Brussels, and what is the sentiment at the moment? What's the atmosphere like?
Well, there has been a lot of focus on the EU's policy on boosting the competitiveness of its industries and bringing down energy prices. We've seen the launch of the Clean Industrial Deal last week, but this week, among top of the headlines, the growing security concerns are taking precedence. And, a big issue that is being discussed is the need for the EU to increase its defense spending. Energy security is obviously top of the agenda. As we know, it's not immune to security threat, to say the least, as we have seen with cyber attacks. And this is likely to create more competing priorities for the EU and the energy sector itself.
So it makes the new sort of geopolitical reality. Then we've seen not energy so much sidelined, but more defence coming to the fore. Would that be fair enough to say?
Yeah, I think so. I was talking to a NATO official last week here in Brussels, and we were discussing security issue for energy just last week. And he was telling me that the EU, but also the energy sector, private investors and energy players needed to boost investment to protect their energy assets. And he was telling me that this was a priority, that the EU needed to shift to a wartime mindset.
Fatima, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Joining us to discuss these critical issues is Kristian Ruby, Secretary General of Eurelectric. A warm welcome to you, Kristian, and good to have you back on the pod.
Thank you very much.
I know in sort of last year, you often talked about the new world order, the geopolitics. It's suddenly taken on a different speed, hasn't it? Really, we've kind of the geopolitical landscape is developing incredibly quickly now. What do you make of what the sort of background? What's your view here, Kristian?
Yeah, well, in essence, we are really seeing a series of seismic shifts to the international order as we've known it, and it's happening, all of this at warp speed. So, in fact, whatever we say today might be sort of even outdated a few days down the line. But in essence, what's happening is a fundamental shift in international relations where the US is taking a very different approach to its traditional allies from Europe and a very different approach to the whole question of Ukraine, just to start in one place. And that has a number of repercussions for European energy security policy and European energy policy as well.
Could you go into a little bit more detail there, Kristian? What are the implications here for energy security and energy policy for Europe?
Well, in essence, what Europe has experienced for a long time now is that we have benefited from a situation where we had cheap security coming from the NATO alliance and the security guarantees extended by the US, and we had cheap energy flowing from, amongst others, Russia to Europe. And that provided us with a little bit of a complacent attitude in some regards. And now the situation is that this is over. We can no longer necessarily rely on the security guarantees of the past. And we can definitely no longer rely on the energy imports that we've enjoyed previously. We saw that very clearly in 2022. So Europe essentially is home alone in this new world, and we need to learn how to provide ourselves with the necessary energy. We need to compete in a much more competitive, aggressively competitive industrial space, and we need to be able to defend ourselves. So this is setting out a very different challenge for the energy sector going forward, one we have to address in a different way than we have before.
Absolutely. I think it's clear as well, as you mentioned, that President Trump is ripping up the transatlantic alliance and all that kind of all the implications that can have for Europe and European energy policy and energy imports. But I'd like to focus just on one area in particular now, Kristian. We've seen cyber attacks targeting critical energy infrastructure, mainly power interconnectors, but also others. How serious is this risk, and what can be done to strengthen Europe's defences at this time when we may not have the backing of the US anymore?
Cybersecurity is a very serious topic for utilities across Europe. We're seeing a rise in cyber attacks against utilities, and we're seeing a rise in the number of successful cyber attacks. We've recently published an analysis of where this is headed. What I would say here is that this is one of a series of challenges that European utilities are now facing, which is making the energy security and the security supply equation a very different one than it was just a few years ago. It's not like cybersecurity is a new topic as such, but it's risen very significantly in importance, and it has been complemented by another issue, which is the physical security of plants. We are increasingly seeing non-identified drones hover over critical installations of our sector. We are increasingly experiencing sabotage attacks against critical infrastructure. And it is this new landscape where malicious actors are actively trying to damage or even destroy our electricity infrastructure that we need to basically deal with in a different way than we have before. What it specifically means with the new security situation, I think we need to address in a couple of different steps. If we look at what's happening in relation to cyber attacks and attacks on critical infrastructure in, for instance, the Baltic Sea, what we need to do in the first instance is to operate differently. We need to activate our military apparatuses to cooperate and to basically act as a deterrent in relation to the actors that try to damage the infrastructure. Then on a more operational level for the electricity sector, we need to do things slightly differently. My vice president, who comes from Finland and has a lot of experience with ominous types of attacks and threats to his power plants and infrastructure, he talks about an increased situational awareness that is required in the operations. He talks about frequent drills and exercises to basically handle difficult, unforeseen situations, and he talks about increased contact with authorities at all levels and at very low levels of, let's say, threat or unusual events. So we need to transition from a time where we could operate in peace to a situation where we're not at war, but we're not at peace either anymore, as the Swedish Prime Minister likes to say. So we need a different type of security approach to the sector in general.
And can we expect to see more collaboration between, say, utilities, grid operators, and military and governments in general?
We can expect that, and we should expect that. It's something that's going to be necessary in a world where electricity is going to be crucial, even more crucial than today, for the secure functioning of the energy system of society. We're electrifying our cars, our heating systems, our industry, and as more of society relies on electricity, it's really, really crucial that electricity stays reliable. And this is also the reason that when we, for instance, look to the hot war on the European continent in Ukraine, there are very persistent efforts of the Russians to take out the electricity and energy infrastructure of Ukraine because they see this as an effective way of inflicting damage on the Ukrainian society.
Mm. And that's, as you mentioned, we're becoming increasingly electrified. We rely on it. Absolutely. So that's to stress the importance of keeping that free from attack and a stable supply for our cars, for our Wi-Fi, for our hospitals, our schools, and everything. That's an absolutely crucial point, Kristian. Moving on to another topic that's been in the news recently, the European Commission has introduced new policies to support industry and keep energy affordable. What's your reaction to these latest policy announcements?
So I was up in Antwerp last week where we sat down with von der Leyen to discuss this New Deal. And overall, my take on this initiative is that it's a positive and necessary one. The Commission has made the effort of really listening to the quite persistent criticism of too much bureaucracy, too much hassle for business. And they have set out an agenda to simplify, to electrify, and to stimulate demand for industrial manufacturing. I think this is necessary in this new world where we have much more geopolitical tension, where we have much more aggressive industrial competition, and where the products that we trade with partners, previous partners, and competitors have a lot of implications for our security because they're intelligent. A Tesla has loads of cameras, has a very acute ability to collect information, and therefore we need to think about the ability of Europe to also produce this type of equipment. So overall, this package is necessary. Now, does it do enough of a difference? I think we have to be honest and say, with the pace of change we're seeing in the world, we have to look at this as a first step in the right direction and acknowledge that more will need to be done. Things will, to some extent, need to be more handheld in the future because there are so many unknowns and so many unforeseens to be expected given the profound changes we're seeing these days.
Absolutely, and how it's very rapidly changing, and like you said at the start, what we're talking about today could be old hat by tomorrow. But do you think the measures are sufficient to protect Europe then from external pressures and internal political shifts and a kind of rise in populism, if you like, as well, which we're seeing across Europe?
I think, in a nutshell, what Europe is dealing with is a set of compounded crises, and this is what makes this situation so difficult. As I said, I think the direction is right, and then we need to see just how much the individual initiatives will do. But to highlight some of the positive aspects of this, I think it is very wise to work with what we call lead markets, with a targeted way of stimulating demand for a certain type of product. Because while we need to ramp up our competitiveness and our ability to defend ourselves, it is crucial that we stay the course on tackling the climate challenge. Even if others are forgetting about this right now, we need to insist on our path towards a climate neutral society. And what that means is that we need to stimulate demand for those products that today are slightly more expensive than their fossil fuel counterparts, but over time will prove to be more clean and more affordable once we get mass production going. So lead markets is a very welcome initiative as part of this broader package. Another thing that they're looking into is the made in Europe requirements. This is a very delicate balance where we need to, on the one hand, let's say, prioritize and acknowledge the need for capabilities for manufacturing in Europe. On the other hand, the price dimension, because as you rightly said, we are in a situation where populist views are on the rise, and where cost of living is a very big deal for the normal European citizen. So if all of a sudden we now say we can only have European stuff, it's going to be very, very expensive, and that won't be sustainable, politically speaking. So we need to strike a fine balance on this, and this is probably one of the areas where we need to work more to get the balance right and to make sure that there's a good sort of mix of cost efficiency on the one hand and let's say impact when it comes to stimulating European production on the other. Then the last point I want to make here is, what about the energy component of this? Because affordable energy has been a key element in this discussion as well. The two sides of this. The first side is that the Clean Industrial Deal rightly identifies electrification as the way forward. This has energy security reasons. We don't want to import too much fossil fuels anymore. But it also has to do with the fact that here's an indigenous resource which is actually very cheap if we are able to price it in the correct way. And the Clean Industrial Deal tries to square that circle by introducing measures to make it more attractive to lock in prices of renewables with so-called power purchase agreements. These power purchase agreements will be more standardized than they have until now, and they will also be de-risked with designate tools that the Commission will now develop in conjunction with the European Investment Bank. So this is another positive element in the Clean Industrial Deal.
Mm. So, I mean, we've seen the Commission has a plan to have the European Investment Bank offer 500 million euros in bank guarantees to make long-term PPAs more attractive and accessible. What difference could such guarantees make to power prices and volatility linked to gas prices in the long term? Because that's obviously been a major, should we say, a headache for some countries in particular.
Yes, I think the first step to understand here, why is it that you'll want to essentially lock in renewable or nuclear production into these power purchase agreements? The reason here is that if you create an agreement between the power producer and the off-taker at a set price, that electricity would then not need to follow the wholesale market price. And that would mean that it would no longer be exposed to the volatility of fossil fuel prices. If gas goes through the roof for some reason of security supply, then, of course, electricity prices in the wholesale market will follow suit as long as gas sets the price. Now, by putting the renewable or nuclear electricity in a PPA, you don't have to basically worry about the gas price for those megawatt hours in question. What about that de-risking mechanism? Let me explain a little bit here. Let's presume that there is an industrial company that approaches a CEO of a power company that says, hey, I really need terawatt hours of electricity. Build an offshore wind park for me, or build a nuclear plant for me. I'm going to give you a PPA. The utility boss says, that's fine. But what if you go bust? Who has the counterpart risk then? Am I lost? Is my investment in this new power producing facility lost? And this is where that guarantee from the EIB comes in and says, we're actually going to extend a guarantee for parts of your investment. That way, bring down the risk premium and also make the cost of capital lower. So there is a real potential for this mechanism to actually help to get more investments off the ground and also reduce the risk premiums and hence ultimately the cost of electricity in that regard. So it's something that we've been asking for, and it's something that we're very happy to see now be part of this package. Now it's really about the design and making sure that the details are all in the right place, but it is a very, very welcome step forward.
I think, these, but it's also important to note, of course, that these markets are, electricity markets are, especially with the rollout of more renewables, by their very nature, extremely volatile in terms of prices because, if the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow, then obviously prices are going to be very high. And when there's an oversupply, price is going to be very low or negative. But I just like to move on to flexibility in the power system, Kristian. Why is flexibility key to energy security?
Well, I think what you just said is, in essence, one of the key issues that we need to reflect on and act on in the next few years, because whereas we all understand that renewables are a key part of our future and are really that indigenous resource that can help our energy security and help our advance towards the climate neutral society, we also need to acknowledge that they come with some impacts on the power system and the price formation in the power system. Indeed, what you just described is what we're seeing increasingly across Europe, what I like to call roller coaster pricing. When we have the renewables in the middle of the day because the sun shines, prices go zero or negative. When we don't have any sun shine or any wind blowing, then all of a sudden prices go up very high. And whereas that makes sense in an economic context, this can be very difficult for citizens to accept and understand. And the normal citizen that comes home from work with two screaming kids and a lot of groceries, they're like, so it was free in the middle of the day and now it's gone through the roof. What's going on? I don't like this. And essentially what it means for the system is that in this new world with more renewables, we need really to get the balancing equation right. And that means we need flexible capacities as never before. We published a study on this recently, and it is quite humbling, to be honest, what we need to do in the context of flexibility between now and 2030.
Yeah, could you please elaborate on those steps that needs to be taken? I mean, I know you've mentioned a study and a recent one that you've published is particularly on electric vehicles, EVs, so how they can provide flexibility to the grid. So what are the key takeaways here, Kristian?
Yeah, so if we start with the good news and the recent study we've done on the flex potential of electric cars, we really have a new vector for flexibility here if we get the frameworks and the technology and the infrastructure right. And what we show in this study is that by 2030, we might be able to provide up to 4% of all the flexibility for the system with the batteries from the electric cars that are going to be all over Europe by then. What's also great about this is that this can save people a lot of money. If they buy a fossil fuel SUV, they will have one cost level. If instead they opt for an electric SUV, they might save up to 25% of the total cost of ownership if we are able to unlock that flexibility potential from the batteries. Now, back to the societal equation here, as I said, it's around 4% of the flexibility we need that can be provided by electric cars by 2030. What that also means is that we need to think carefully about the remaining 96%. And that's why we're very adamant in Eurelectric to say this is an all hands on deck approach we need. We need all levers of firmness and flexibility that we can mobilize for the system, because electricity is becoming so important for societal energy supply, and the pricing and the stability of electricity is going to be so crucial for the political support for the transition, that this is really a mission critical element of the equation to get the flexibility right.
But we still want the momentum needs to be there in terms of the take up of electric cars, doesn't it, Kristian? I mean, I was seeing in some countries, they're moving the targets a little bit further towards 2040. But so, I mean, you've got the 2035 ban on sales of new internal combustion engine motor vehicles. But do you think we're moving in fast enough?
So I'd say, first of all, are we moving fast enough? Politically speaking, I think the targets are appropriate and very ambitious. They're appropriate from a scientific perspective. They're also very ambitious to actually reach. So politically, we're in the right spot with the existing legislation. Is the market moving fast enough? Here, I think we need a bit more work, frankly. The good news is that we're seeing an increased pickup of electric car sales again in 2025. Some of the main markets have seen some significant increases in sales, which is good. The bad news is that it's not enough in order to sort of hit the curve for the 2035 phase out of new ICE sales. So we need to speed up, but I'm attaching some hope to the fact that we now see a new generation of very affordable electric cars enter the market. And frankly speaking, for car lovers like myself, it's quite exciting. Every day pretty much you have a new, really, really fascinating model come out, whether it's from some of the Korean manufacturers or many of the European manufacturers that are frankly really, really impressive in this game. I love what I see coming out of Renault, what I see coming out of VW. The new Audis are absolutely spectacular. So I'm really, really excited that especially the European car manufacturers have hooked on to this trend and are really, upping their game and doing their very best to deliver fantastic electric cars for the market.
I drive a Skoda, and I'm very happy with that, Kristian. The Skoda Enyaq electric. That's a
beautiful one. I love that one.
Yeah, absolutely. But just to round off, I think I think it's a very exciting prospect to think of using the fleet of electric cars as a backup battery for the grid. I think that's quite an exciting prospect, and I think something that hopefully we will be able to achieve by 2030. But I know we're running out of time, Kristian. I'd just like to thank you very much for being a guest on Plugged In, the Montel News podcast. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.